What If by Lynked. The sky was alight with an orange glow that could only be produced by a dying flame. Streaks of gold, red and a dash of purple spanned the emptiness of the light as the light died away, a darkness rising in its place. The air was chilled and only growing colder as a brisk breeze washed across the desolate flat cloudscape that sat grey in the sky. It blocked the beautiful array from grazing the grounds like a shield to a flower. It was a shame, too. Sunsets were a glorious display, soothing and serene, as the twilight hours flickered briefly. Across the expansive grey blockage, atop the lumps and hills of the rumbling clouds, sat an outstretched lump of vivid cyan. A multi-hued spectrum of rainbow-streaked strands pulled from beneath her, creeping over the small mounds of bland fluff. Her eyes were blind to the open world, open only to the mesh of warm and cold above her. The yin-yang of the twilight hour always seemed to worm its way into her core and burrow in for a while, before fleeting quicker than it had came. Her chest expanded as she drew deep, long breath. It released, as a low sigh, her chest deflating once more. Head propped up on her forearms, she lay there in silence, doing no more than just staring up at that thick canvas called the sky. She seemed grim. Even her eyes, trained though they were, drooped with forlorn gaze. Upon her mouth was the tiniest hint of a frown. Nothing more serious, not a scowl, a grimace, or a sneer. Simply a frown. Though the somber serenity that wafted through the cold breeze was bittersweet, the taste on the back of this mare's tongue was sour and pungent. The weight of her eyes was unbearable. The dark, heavy bags beneath them sagged as though they were putting on a conscious effort to drag her into dragging her down. Yet, no matter how much force she applied, and she had put forth much lately, she couldn't shut her eyes for even a wink. Her thoughts were racing too fast for her to comprehend them. One would fire off, only to be muffled by yet another. It was an overlaying system, and soon she could feel her supports cracking under the weight. Oh, how she ached to sleep again, to socialize again. But here she was, just like the 2 past days, alone atop a Pegasus storm. Would she sleep tonight? She did not know. Celestia willing she would. If not, well, the idea of slamming full on into a wall was beginning to scrape her mind. What was worse, as though days of sleeplessness and isolation could become such, was the sad fact that she couldn't even place her hoof on the problem. There was a storm brewing in her mind, no doubt about it, but just what it entailed, well, that was the grand mystery. She breathed out a sigh, adding a bit of crackling vocal ring to it. The scratchy note deflated and was soon brisked away in the evening constant breeze. To the contrary of her destitute position, however, she was nowhere near the verge of giving up. She didn't become the fastest flyer in all of Equestria by giving up, no did she? So, behind her blank expression that gazed into the darkening beyond, she drafted up a mental checklist. She could actually see it, feel it, and possibly, thanks to her little bookworm friend who always had these things at all times, as much as this colorful pony hated to admit it, there were 1 or 2 things she had picked up from that nerd. A mental image of a feathered quill materialized in the ferocious chaos of her mind, scribbling down the appropriate thoughts as they whirled by in the painful maelstrom of her mind. She had been at a gala just 2 days ago. The thought surprised her, freezing the scalding utensil in its place. The gala had been an eternity away, though she reasoned that she had forced herself to truly see it from her eyes. The mashing of days and nights threw everything off. Just yesterday she had eaten a breakfast sandwich in her kitchen at 3 in the afternoon, and thought it to be midnight. Sleep deprivation did strange things. After a few moments of taking in the sky, which by now was speckled with tiny shimmers and a distant glimmer, her sight receded past the magenta eyes yet again. Her clipboard, paper and quill were still there, ready to be used. So, naturally, she used them. The next thing to be scratched down was her failure with the Wonderbolts. How illustrious that had been! To be ignored by her own heroes, who she had saved the lives of, and their pie, was not only humiliating, but also sickening. The breeze around her picked up, rushing her deeper into the night. Days of endless pity and self-loathing, all for this unknown cause, had turned her numb to the world. By now, she hardly flinched at the thin red and yellow hair strands that lashed at her eyes. She hardly shifted when the cloud beneath her rumbled and boomed with its ominous crack of thunder. Not even once had she tried to smoothen out the ruffled patches of fur that were popping up across her body. Though, to be fair, it wouldn't have made a difference. Her light cyan coat was matted and slick in areas that painted her with oily polka dots. Her mane was clumped and knotted as it swayed in the sideways wind. And even her tail, which she had pride in as being the best pony to ever grace any pony's rump, was nasty and greasy. To top it off, were it not for the unrelenting wind, an awful smell, possibly close to that of a decaying carcass, would be awash in the clouds, spewing a vile collection of odors amassed from the days of not showering. With the faded light finally dying to but a whisper on the horizon, and the moon beginning to replace its twin, she retracted to her clipboard. The quill stalled. The next obvious thought whipped by her, striking her heart. She was dumbfounded as to how she could put this into words. Her friends, those 5 innocent mares that she actually enjoyed lumbering herself with, had brushed her plights away. That night, at good old Donut Joe's, where she had expressed her pain of abandonment by her idols, they had done no more than giggle and say, "At least we've got each other." It just wasn't good enough. Guilt. That's what panged her. And not simply in her throbbing mind either. It stabbed in her heart, twisting like a gleaming blade of a knife. She shifted on the cloud, her flat gaze degrading into a more somber, desperate state. Her eyes drooping impossibly lower, and her lip finally curved down in her corners. Was she saying that her friends weren't enough? That the Wonderbolts were better? It was an awful thought for sure, but it was there nonetheless. It crept around in her mind like a spider weaving its web, ready to trap her and devour her. She loved her friends. She loved them dearly. If they ever were in danger, she was there. Just as a pompous little fashion diva she cared for at the bottom of her heart had fallen to the Icarus syndrome, and she had dived down to save her at the cost of her own show. The memory was clear in her mind, the wind in her face, the burning of the mac cone, the crack and the boom of colorful pastel circlet as it radiated from behind her, and then, of course, the Wonderbolts. Now, the possibility stirred in her guts with a sickening gargle. She might have done it for her friend. She would do anything for her friend. It's what the element of loyalty does, right? Ah, but loyalty played fickle in her hooves, and no matter how hard she tried, she could never grasp it. Yes, she was loyal. She made a note of this on her foe checklist. But just exactly who was she loyal to? The Wonderbolts had come into her life far before the generous diva had. Hey, she practically worshipped the aerial crew, and she knew it too. So, was it them she had saved with her friend being a bonus? Or was it the other way around? Quickly, she drew a foreleg from beneath her head, wrapping it around her midsection and cringing. Her face crunched tight, turning instantly red and strained. Teeth bared as she bent into an arc, exposing her neck and flank fully to the night's breathing. The thought of food, perhaps a warm toasted Pop-Tart, flooded in her mind, but unfortunately not her gargling stomach. There was no food in sight, unless she could eat the clouds, and from what past experience told her, that was a big fat no. So she pushed herself down, giving it her all to ignore the stabbing pain in her gut. She forced herself back into her reclined position, letting her face return to its somber frown and glossy stare. As she readjusted, she muttered something to the wind. It was drivel, slurred, like only an exhausted or drunken pony could achieve. It was fairly nonsensical, pointless, and lacked in vowels, but it did manage to conjure up that crisp image of the clipboard, paper, and quill yet again. She reviewed its contents with a distant gaze, listing them down in their order: failure, rejection, and being ignored. So far, it wasn't too bright. The next to go on the list was a less than fortunate event: drinking. Criticism galore for such a hobby. She popped off the cap of a cold one and set it down on the hatch. Keeping a jubilant mask on wasn't easy, especially not when she was being ignored by not only her idols but by her friends as well. In her world, it was all fair and right to be allowed to relax after such a night, and she supposed that's where restlessness began. Stars dazzled in the sky above. It was dark now. The last kiss of the sun faded, depleted from the world. It was now the moon's turn to rule the sky, and rule it did. It was colossal tonight. The cyan insomniac could clearly make out the porous craters and splitting crevices that the pale orb had to offer. She felt as though she could simply reach out and graze them with a hoof. She tried, in fact, sprawling her forelegs out from underneath her greasy mane. It extended to its full length, hardly filling up the huge gap between her and something so close. Just like her thoughts, though, she noted. So close, yet so far. Oh, what if she could touch it? What if she could graze the moon with her hoof? Would that give her the satisfaction she craved? And what if she could reach these thoughts? What if she could come to peace with herself and her quarreling mind? The first answer that spun in her mind: sleep. A long, deep slumber to make the dragons envious. And then food. A meal for the princesses. But these were simple physical rewards. Peace would bring acceptance to her mind, perhaps a bit of joy and a touch of laughter. A certain buoyant mass of energy booted the wooden slab from her mind's eye, a pink, frothy mane bouncing in harmony with the rest of her body. She knew this pony as her best friend. They had so much in common, being pranksters and jokers to the end of time. Perhaps she simply needed a laugh. The thought of the smile only made her strained lips crease more, though. Smiles and joy were different, as were laughs and happiness. But this pony could combine all four into that one big party in a box. She wouldn't trade his mare for the world. Then the rejection portion of the clipboard flashed its ugly ink. If it really came down to it, would she abandon her best friend for the sake of the happiness that was promised but not showed? To be part of an elite team was so tantalizing. How in Equestria could she make up her mind? She pressed her hooves against her head with full scowl now, shaking her whole body to and fro. What if she traded her best friend for a lifetime of fortune and fame? What if she surrendered her position as the element of loyalty for a showering of loyalty to her? What if she wasn't truly loyal to her friends at all, but instead resided her loyalty in her lifelong heroes? Questions and questions and more questions. That was all she could conjure now. These were just simple questions. Her mind didn't show any signs of stopping either, to her deep, genuine chagrin. What if she had been accepted into the Wonderbolts and the Gala? What if she gave up all her friends for it? What if she never had those friends in the first place? Even a simple thought, though it bruised her mind for a mere second, sent waves of disgust through her entire body. She slowly shook her head, letting her empty eyes fall from the expanse above her to the stretching plains of grey upon which she lay. Her mind perked up. For what reason, she did not know. But the spike was there, as new questions invaded her splitting head. What if her friends deeply cared? What if the Wonderbolts didn't match up to the love and care she received from her friends every day? What if the fame, the fortune, the rush, what if it just didn't compare? Was that even a possibility? The thought of her friends, each of their smiling faces as they laughed and played, frolicked and leaped together. She was there, smiling as well, and they were all so happy. Even on her face there was a look of pure, unrefined joy. What if this was where she belonged? And then it clicked. So many questions and so few answers, but it clicked. Life was just one big what if. And for the hundreds upon hundreds of what if questions she could ask, very few had real answers. What fell to her hooves to do was pick them out, like picking out the good grapes on a dying vine. Those questions, the ones with solid answers behind them, were the true questions, the ones that could guide and answer believably. So what if her friends deeply cared? Well, she would love them even more. And what if the fame, the fortune, and the rush of the wonderworlds just didn't compare? Well, she'd miss where she was now, and finally, what if this was where she belonged? Well, then she'd be happy for the rest of her days. A smile grew on her lips, giving her tense muscles a well-deserved break. She understood now, and was happy. She was happy with her friends, and were she to leave, she couldn't even begin to fathom the heartbreak. And besides, she reasoned, she already was part of an elite team, the team of her friends, the elements of harmony. Satisfaction alight in her eyes, like a freshly relit wicker, she rolled onto her belly and carefully pushed herself onto her hooves. Her legs wobbled a bit, and she did a stumble once or twice, but in the end she managed to level out. Her eyes were darted and glazed evenly with a thick passion. She knew what she was going to do now. First, of course, shower, eat, and rest. She would undoubtedly need these for tomorrow. A day out with her friends seemed to be in order. Up higher and higher she flew, into the star-splattered sky, the chilly breeze doing its part to lift her sluggish body from the clouds. Slow though she was, the smile on her face wavered not once as she turned away, beating her wings, and disappeared into the cold, welcoming night. The end.